Hello there, and welcome back to Inside the Vault, episode number 49. I'm your host, Ryan Smith, here on Carolina Panthers podcast. My guest today, he is ESPN senior NFL reporter and also Sports Center insider.
Yeah.
You know him well from ESPN, the worldwide leader. He is Jeremy Fowler. Jeremy, how are you today?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you on. Let's just jump right into it. So the Carolina Panthers, as we know, 1-4 record in this 2024 season. Not the best start for this team, but we have the Red Rifle Andy Dalton kind of leading the charge. We'll get to Panther Falcons, the hated rivalry in the NFC South, in just a few minutes. But I want to start with Bryce Young. So let me preface this question. Having interviewed a lot of people around the team and around guys like Joe Person, Mike Hay of the Charlotte Observer, Joe Person, The Athletic, and others. So people have various opinions when it comes to Bryce Young. There's been things written about, his future in Carolina. Okay, here's mine. I want you to explain, maybe to me, maybe to the listeners who may not be as well versed in some of this stuff and how inside the building these things work. My theory is, at the end of the day, whether the Panthers are 1-7, 3-5, or whether they're, a little bit better, I think the plan was always for Bryce Young to be inserted back at some point in the season. We don't know when. We obviously saw him at the end of the Chicago game there with the game being out of hand. I'm thinking, ideally, yes, you want him to sit the rest of the season and you don't want him to play well. But I personally might be in the minority, but the Panthers have tell me if this is crazy. Can the Panthers still have a future with Bryce Young in Carolina simply because you invested all the resources that you did? Canales came in to try to fix him. He really didn't get the chance to sit last year with Frank Reich, and now that he's actually sitting and learning, that's a good thing. And so in 2025, why won't the Panthers, whether it's Andy Dalton or other quarterbacks, kind of run it back with Bryce Young, see if he's taken that step and kind of keep going and kind of invest in what you kind of brought out there, you know what I'm saying? Or is that just naive, not how this works? Once you bench him, he's done.
Well, I would never be as definitive to say that he's just done there, won't play another snap, because right now he's the number 2 quarterback, and it could happen organically. A lot of things can unfold here in the next month, right? Let's say Andy Dalton hits a rough patch and really struggles. Let's say, the losing continues and they just want to shake it up and play Bryce. Like that. Those things can happen. Now,
sure.
That said, when I talk to people in and around the situation, I don't get the sense that they're clamoring to play Bryce Young anytime soon. Now, could that change this year? Certainly. I would say this. I think he would have to make some improvements kind of behind the scenes to get that chance again. I don't think they've written him off completely, but I would be a little surprised if they're saying, hey, we're going to put him right back in the lineup here in a couple of weeks and roll with Bryce. I just don't think that's been the plan. I think the plan's been to roll with Andy and not really think about Bryce right now. I really do believe that's the case. Because even though it's clearly a team in transition, I think the Panther staff and head coach Dave Canales realized that early on, hey, these players have bought in, even though they're losing and they're not overly talented, but they're willing to give it a shot. This isn't a case where they've tuned out the head coach already. I think that the staff felt like they have to do what's best for the team, and Andy is what's best for the team. I don't know that I see that changing. I won't deal in absolutes, but I would lean more on the other side that he wouldn't play. I think when you talk to people about the situation, it's yeah, Bryce Young is a great kid. I think he'll do great in his next spot, whether it's here or somewhere else. You hear that kind of phrasing a lot, which is sort of generic, but speaks to the fact that he might not be in the plan soon.
Yeah.
So that's my nuanced answer. Yeah. But I don't think it's clear cut, but I would lean more on the side of him not being in the plans. But we'll see.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, ideally you want him to sit for the rest of the year, something he did not get in 2023, which I think he should have gotten all along. You learn and develop, and then in 2025, whether it's Andy Dalton re-sign or another veteran quarterback, let's see what Bryce has learned from his sitting. Let's see what the investment has that you paid so much to get. You don't just trade him for a 4th-round pick. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're not going to get higher than a 4th or 5th round pick. So you got to see what you got. anyway, that's me and my soapbox. But we can
Yeah,
just keep going. But
I can see
I wanted
that.
to at least start off with that because I think listeners just have this nuanced plan that he's just automatically going to come back in there once Salt struggles, or he's just going to all of a sudden be great again. We just don't know. It, like you said, we'll tell
Yeah,
kind of what this holds with Bryce and Carolina.
yeah,
Let's go to the Panthers now versus Falcons this week on Sunday at Bank of America Stadium. 4:25 start versus Kirk O'Chains and Kirk Cousins. The Panthers, the Falcons and Panthers. I think this is going to be a high scoring game. Both teams can be had on defensive side of the ball. The Panthers are just absolutely
yeah,
decimated the defensive side of the ball. Derek Brown, Shaq Thompson, Josie
yeah.
Jewell, Jordan Fuller, and company. How do you think, ideally speaking, not just this game with the Falcons, but kind of beyond, what is Dave Canales' goal for the Panthers this season? You know, it's one thing to stay behind the podium, all positive, and let's do this. But realistically, what do you think Dave Canales' goal is with the Panthers this season? Is it simply just to establish the culture and winning games is kind of gravy, or is it to kind of do both at the same time and realize that we're not kind of like the Arizona Cardinals of the last year? We're going to be in every game or most games. We may not win a lot of them, but we're going to be in most games.
I think it's probably a variation of the latter. There's not a disillusionment there that they were ever going to go 17-0 or even 14-3. But I think it's a staff that is trying to create a culture that players want to buy into, and that they sort of chip away at that winning component. That like by the end of the year you're trending upward, or there are signs of improvement that bring hope and optimism that you're building something that maybe in year 2 or year 3 can be something. Now, you talk to coaches, they want to win every week. They're kind of tunnel vision that way. But I think there's a long-term vision here where they're trying to look 2 to 3 years down the road, because you have to. Even the best coaches do that. Andy Reid, guys like that. Like they're always looking at the now and the long term at the same time. So I think that's in the mind. And they know that the defense is not what it was, and that to win they have to win shootouts. I do think that's part of why Andy's playing, is that just he gives them a better chance to score points. And it's really that simple. So they know they're not going to win a lot of 12-10 games right now based on the personnel they have on the defensive side. So that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, and this is go ahead. And this is what people also, I think, don't understand. It's like, Ajero Rivera, Panthers defensive coordinator, who's been in contention for the head coaching job. Obviously, this year may not be the case with Panthers' record. He didn't ask for Shaq Thompson to go down. He didn't ask for Derek Brown to go down.
Yeah.
The Panthers signed Shaq Lawson, signed a few other people. And it's like, at the end of the day, you have to play with the cards you're dealt. But at the same time, this is what the Panthers are right now. And I think people need to kind of wrap their mind around that. For example, the run defense is not just going to get better because you lose Derek Brown. I'm sorry, it's going to stay like it is, because that's the fact of reality right now. So having said that, when it comes to this future of this team, you got guys like we mentioned, Diontae Johnson, Adam Thielen. You hear about their names at the trade deadline. Well, Jeremy, I want you to dispel a kind of myth or a rumor that I think Panther fans have. Well, Ryan, we traded Chris McCaffrey. We traded Brian Burns. We traded DJ Moore. These are all great pieces that we had on our team that were foundational building blocks, just to see them leave out the door and perform for other great teams. So Adam Thielen, I understand. But why would the Panthers trade Diontae Johnson? It makes absolutely no sense if you want to build around him for the future and actually give him a new contract, a new building block for whoever the quarterback might be. So what you know what I'm trying to you know what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, so as far as Deontay, I think that's more, teams would have interest if he was available. And I think teams will call on him, because if the Panthers are sitting at 1-6 leading into late October, and the trade deadline's approaching, I think there'll be some inquiries. That's really where it's coming from. I don't, and I've talked about Johnson being like maybe a receiver the teams will look at the trade deadline. You say something on SportsCenter, and then it's like aggregated as, Panthers could trade this guy. And I don't, I never said he was available. I said the teams look at Carolina as maybe going into seller's mode. So, because of that, they're going to call him Deontay Johnson. I mean, look how many teams we have out here that are receiver needy at the moment. that are in on the Devontae Adams trade, whether it's the Jets, Saints, Bills, Steelers, maybe even a little Ravens. So that's really what it comes down to. I don't necessarily see, if they want to stay competitive for the rest of the year, they need Diontae Johnson. I mean, that's very clear. And I know he and Andy Dalton kind of had to get on the same page because from what I'm told, Deontay's he's a smaller receiver in stature, but he covers a lot of grass quickly, almost more than you would think a small guy would because of his route running. So he and Andy spent significant time together getting on the same page. So because of that, and it's not like he has a huge salary to have to dump necessarily. So because of that, I think that he's certainly valued there, and he's the number one option right now. So I don't see that changing, but you never know. If somebody makes a great offer for him and you're 1-7, you do something like I could see that scenario, but I don't think he's on the block by any stretch.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. I think a lot of Panther fans are saying we can't just keep repeating this cycle year after year. It's a quarterback-driven league. We all know that, but at some point you got to keep your J.C. Horns, your Derek Browns of the world, and actually grow the talent on your roster. Don't just keep trading them away for picks and watch them perform elsewhere. I think that's what the Panther fans are tired of. At the end of the day. When it comes to the Panthers in general, what is something that I get it. The Sports Center is not going to be talking about the Carolina Panthers every waking moment of every day. Obviously, we all know that. What is something though, maybe around the National Football League or around just the Carolinas? When it comes to the Panthers, what is something we're not talking enough about? What's a storyline that's kind of getting underrated when it comes to the Panthers? It could be good, it could be bad, but something we're not talking about enough when it comes to this 2024 version of the Carolina Panthers, or even.
I would say, I mean, a couple things come to mind. One is, and it's similar to the Deshaun Watson situation in Cleveland a little bit, where when you go all in for a quarterback and you sell out for that position, it's a dangerous proposition we're now seeing. I think teams, Carolina's part of this, teams are sort of recalibrating how they look at quarterbacks a little bit. And I think that's healthy. The game got so out of whack where 5 years ago, it's like, if you don't have a top 10 guy, top 12 guy, you have no chance in the NFL. And that's changed. I don't think that's the case anymore. Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, all retreads that have flourished this year. So you don't need like the $50 million guy necessarily. I mean, it's good. You need capable quarterback play, but you can make it work in other ways. So Carolina is like sort of exhibit A on that because they tried to get Deshaun. And then when they didn't, they went and got Bryce and sold the farm for Bryce and picked the wrong guy. Whereas CJ Stroud was right there. So I think that theme, the quarterback theme, is interesting in relation to Carolina. And then also another underplayed theme is, Ejiro Evero, defensive coordinator, who is, has worked his way into position to be a head coach and probably should be a head coach. And he's been put in a really difficult spot here because he had multiple teams that were trying to hire him as a DC that had better defenses, and Carolina didn't want to let him leave, so they keep him from getting coached, and then they don't replenish the defense, and it might be the most talent efficient defense in the league. So I think that's an underplayed storyline, is like a once hot head coaching candidate put in a really tough spot.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, you work with what you got, and obviously, like I said earlier, he didn't plan to have Shaq Thompson, Garrett Brown obviously go down. J.C. Horn is someone out there. I think a lot of Panther fans talk about where's he seen among the corners in the league? Because I think Pat Surtain, we all talk about, he went in the same draft as J.C. Horn. But Panther fans will contend. J.C. Horn is a top 8 corner when healthy and actually playing consistently good ball, but he just gets overshadowed obviously because he's in Carolina.
Yeah, I think he's certainly, with a full season, if he can put together a full body of work, that's key, and play 17 games this year and play well, he can make a case to be a top 10 cornerback. I don't think there's any doubt. There's always been the feeling that the talent's there. It's just, some look at injury as a skill or health as a skill. Like, can you find a way to be on the field? Like some guys can do that and some have had trouble with that. And maybe that's unfair, but, he just hasn't been able to put it all together and stay healthy. So, but the talent's always been there. He's long, he's rugged, plays hard, he's physical. Like, he's got a lot of traits that you want. I don't know that he's ever going to be in that Patrick Surtain class, but certainly he can be a top 10 cornerback. I don't think there's any doubt, and build off of that. And so maybe he ends up having a big year and they sign him to an extension this offseason. I think he's a guy they would like to keep.
Here, Jeremy Fowler here on Inside the Vault, episode number 49. Smith here with you. As we wrap up, Jeremy, a couple more for you. We'll get you out of here. When it comes to Dave Canales, Dan Morgan, former Panther great, now the general manager of the Carolina Panthers, how are they seen, around the league as a whole? Because, Dan Morgan, we all know, was under Scott Fitter as the assistant GM. A lot of Panther fans were like him as a player, but as a GM, they weren't sure after, Fitter got the axe. And then Dave Canales, not exactly knocking on anybody else's door, as a head coaching candidate 1 year with Baker Mayfield in Tampa, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith in Seattle. So talk about how they're seen kind of around the league. And, is this kind of like the Detroit Lions when Dan Campbell gets there kind of year one, and then maybe in year three they kind of start contending after another draft or two? Or what's kind of the long-term vision with this era of Canales, Morgan, and how's it seen around the league?
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible to at least get on that upward trajectory in year 2 and 3. I mean, you can do a lot of damage in an offseason if you want to. You make a couple right draft picks, a couple right free agent signings, then you can be right back on the horse. I mean, that's how the NFL's set up now, set up for parity. You don't have to wait 3 or 4 years to be decent. It might take 2, but you have enough time to make it work. Dan Morgan's interesting because certainly a well-respected scout coming up with Seattle and Buffalo, was a lieutenant to some really good GMs like John Schneider in Seattle and Brandon Beane in Buffalo. It's interesting where I think he does have to prove himself in the sense that he was in a Carolina regime that made some bad choices, and maybe that there are some extenuating circumstances to that, and it's not all their fault, and it's not all Dan Morgan's fault, but certainly didn't work. So the fact that David Tepper is doubling down on that regime by keeping Dan and elevating him shows that, well, one, he believes in him. 2, I do think there's a cachet of somebody who has a long scouting track record with being an ex-Carolina great, and somebody who brings a cachet. I think all that's important in a market like that. So he's just got to put together the right roster. I think he can. As for Dave Canales, I know he wasn't necessarily looked at the hottest name as in he interviewed for 3 or 4 head coaching jobs. I think this was his only one, but he brought what Carolina needs and needed at the time, which is a new energy, a new outlook, somebody who's creative offensively. He's shown that with Geno Smith as his quarterback's coach, and then with Baker Mayfield his first year as Tampa's OC. He really pressed all the right buttons. They got a slow start, but we're surging at the end. He's stubborn about running the ball, which I think is a quality and a skill that not a lot of coordinators have. I mean, you see it, around the league where teams rely on the pass too much, but he will stick to his convictions. And we saw with Bryce Young in the benching, that's a very bold move. I don't think it was a haphazard move. I think it was a well thought out move. And he decided that when you make a decision, if you're going to make it eventually, you just need to make it now, not in week 9, not in week 11. So it was the kind of courageous move, honestly, that you have to tip your hat to a little bit. I don't think it was reckless. I think it was just courageous, saying, let's, it's like the Raiders right now with Devontae Adams, right? If they would have traded him this offseason, that would have been a little early and there would have been some criticism, but it would have looked better than what you're dealing with now, where you're having a hard time getting a high pick for him because you waited. So where clearly he wasn't going to be happy with the quarterback situation, so sometimes you just got to get ahead of things a little bit. So, I think Dave did the smart thing that he felt was right in doing so, even though it was messy and a hard situation with the quarterback in place. But I think they can. They have to prove it. They got to show it, right? Me on the outside, I knew this year was going to be a little ugly. I think anything that was respectable as far as win totals was just gravy. It's just not a great roster. It's just not. I know the offensive line is better, but they got a ways to go. But you can fix that in a calendar year, or at least address a decent percentage of it.
Yeah. Last 2 for you. David Tepper, who you just mentioned, I don't have to get some bad rap around the league. And, I made this comparison a couple times on some of my earlier podcasts. Jed York with the 49ers, when he, was around for in the earlier years, he was kind of seen as kind of a similar way. And yet he, hired Kyle Shanahan, he hired John Lynch, and then he kind of stepped back and let them do their thing. And I think David Tepper, is finally doing that in Carolina and letting Canales, letting Dan Morgan kind of run the show, do their thing. There's a famous press conference in the offseason where Tepper, went to get asked by a reporter from a question. He said, I'm in the background now. That's what he said. So the question I think a lot of Panther fans have is how long can he not put his trigger finger on the piece, and how long can he stay in the background? I think that's ultimately what I think Panther fans are hoping for. He stays in the background, allows the football people to do their decisions, and then kind of get everything on the right course moving.
Well, he's a smart businessman, and he knows that running a quality business requires a level of restraint at times. I don't necessarily think he should just disappear and not be involved. I really don't. The good owners will question their personnel department or their head coach, but they do so in a way that emboldens them, right? Like that makes them feel their convictions even stronger. So what you're trying to do is like motivate those guys, and that requires challenging them a little bit, I think, So it's up to the head coach and the GM to have the backbone to handle that. So I don't necessarily think that he should be all out. He just can't be all in. And so I do get the sense that he's learned a little bit. I know some people around the league are skeptical that he can show the proper control and restraint to do that. This is a guy that was known to be on social media during the games in his early years of the tenure, just getting frustrated and seeing what everybody's saying about his team and, questioning a lot of things. Like he was just known for that. So, but I do think he's taking a little bit of a step back, or trying to, and that will be best for the organization. But he still needs to be involved for them to be successful. I do believe that.
Last one for you, Jeremy, as we get you out of here. Just encourage the Panther fans in Charlotte and around the Carolinas and even around the country. I know a lot of Panther fans in other states as well. What is kind of your message to the team this year, next year, this offseason? What is your message to Panther Nation? How can we keep pounding here in the Carolinas, as the great Sam Mills said, when it comes to not just the football, but also kind of this team and their trajectory over the next year or two?
Yeah. Well, I think you can turn around quickly. You have some pieces now in place. You have a good offensive line that you've spent on, that they're getting better, it seems. You can run the ball. You have a head coach that's committed to that. I think if they, the defense is a bit of a mess, but I do think they can add a few pieces in a hurry that can help change things. You're just going to have to spend a little bit, and you're going to have to save up your draft capital to get the right players. But, certainly with Derek Brown getting back next year, you have a building block between him and J.C. Horn. You have two guys who can build around. If you can just get one more, then you look at like the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? I'm not saying the Panthers will be the Steelers, but they have three guys. They got T.J. Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward that you build around, and then Patrick Queen to an extent. But if you can just get three guys on defense, you can at least work around those stars. And so they still have the bones or the skeleton to be able to do that. And there's no reason why they can't be good in 2025. I don't think so. I mean, you just have to spend a little bit. So, but I think they have the right people in place, and they got to figure out the quarterback situation for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think they had that third one. Trevin Wallace, rookie out of Kentucky, who started last week for the first time in place of Shaq Thompson, 15 tackles. First, they had to do that since Luke Kuechly did it back in his rookie year. So I think they have that third building block in Trevin Wallace from Kentucky. We'll see kind of what happens there at linebacker. Well, Jeremy, all the best. Thank you for joining Inside the Vault here with me at episode number 49, and we'll talk to you down the road. Thanks again for coming on.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
And that'll wrap up this episode of Inside the Vault, episode number 49. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and we'll see you next time.